Policing Authority staff in the room. And as you'll all be aware, the meeting is streamed live. So just check your mobile phones, please, are switched off. And just be aware that anybody present in the audience may appear as part of the records. Just for those attending and observing, silence should be observed at all times. And if you do need to leave the room, just do so quietly without disturbing the meeting. Again, you're present to observe, and the meeting is with the authority and the Garda Commissioner, and anybody else is just here in an observer status. Thank you very much and welcome. Bob.
Die agus fáilte go dtí an cruinniú Seán céad cruinniú peibli den údar as pólíneachta im Líana. Mariana mar hana tá méid ag teachta chéile faoi scá an úfáis leis na heachtraí chunach mar a réir agus an iireachta duineach ifigach de seirbhís pólíneachta húscartéireann a dhúnmharú agus tá tuiscint ag an Garda Síochána faoi teannachar achtraí den cinál sin. Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting in public of the Policing Authority of Ireland, the first meeting in public of 2023, and welcome to those who are participating by viewing or listening to this meeting, and welcome to the Commissioner and his colleagues as well. As has happened on a number of times previously, this meeting is taking place under the shadow of an attempt to murder a police officer in Northern Ireland last night. Garda Síochána and its members are no strangers, alas, to such attempts being made, and many have given the ultimate sacrifice in the service of the state and of the people. And members of the Garda Síochána, too, on a continuing basis, find themselves to be the subject of grotesque and impermissible and utterly condemnable assaults on regrettably all too frequent basis. And the authority has always condemned those and fully understands the impact that they have on individuals who go out every day and every night in the service of the state and with the intention of keeping all of us safe. And Commissioner, I wonder if there is anything you might want to say in the context of the attack last night on Detective Chief Inspector Caldwell in Omagh.
Thank you very much, and it is indeed a very sombre day for all of us involved in policing on this island. Obviously, our thoughts are with John and with his family, but in a practical sense, as a policing service which is neighbouring PSNI, we have provided and assured PSNI of every assistance in terms of what operationally we can do to assist them, both in terms of the investigation, but also then the ongoing operations that are being conducted today and which we expect to carry on over the coming days as well. Last night we immediately were informed of this attack, and we reacted quickly in terms of providing very strong presence in the border area, and that has carried on throughout the day. And I've personally assured the Chief Constable of our ongoing support, and indeed we will keep pace with whatever requirements that they would make of us, as well as obviously conducting our own inquiries as well. And also then you touch upon ongoing news coverage in respect of assaults on members of Garda Síochána. Again, that's of great concern to myself, great concern to all in the command team of Garda Síochána. I think it's one of the heaviest responsibilities that any manager in a police organisation can bear, is the responsibility for those that work for you and who face on a daily basis uncertainty in terms of what they might face at any time. We are constantly reviewing the equipment that is available to members for protection, and also then in consultation with the associations in respect of health and safety. But all these matters are kept under constant review, and also we know that we are acting with the support of the great majority of society and the very strong support of government as well, and yourselves in terms of the duties that we undertake and the manner in which we go about those. Policing is not an easy occupation, it's an honourable occupation, but at times it can be difficult, and it does lead at times to members of An Garda Síochána having to put themselves in harm's way because it's harm that we seek to prevent, and that's part of the role. But at the same time, some of these incidents are totally gratuitous, unnecessary, and grotesque, as you've said yourself, and should be condemned by everyone in society. And we roundly condemn them, but we have an obligation also to investigate and bring individuals before the courts, and we have an obligation to protect the public as well. And all these things need to be balanced together with the safety of our own members as they conduct their duties.
Thank you, Commissioner. We move on then to the first of the 3 or 4 themes for this afternoon's meeting, the quality of serious crime investigation, and Debbie Donnelly to lead on that.
Good afternoon, everyone. Talking about serious crime, I wondered if you could say a little bit about the levels of serious crime that currently exist, whether the nature of that has changed in any way over the last 5-10 years.
Sorry, thank you very much. I'll bring Justin in a wee second, but I would say the nature of crime has changed, and COVID lockdown, on online frauds. But we're very aware that we as a nation, we are a target for transnational organised crime. We're seen as a place where there are ripe pickings, either for the sale of illegal drugs, but also areas such as human trafficking as well. And as we've come out of COVID, we've seen things like street disorder around the nighttime economy start to emerge as well. So there's always challenges for us as a policing service, but it's not to say that the situation is entirely hopeless. We have seen significant decreases in some areas of crime, and our service and the delivery of our service and our response to many areas of crime has greatly improved, and I point towards crimes of serious sexual assault, domestic abuse, but also then the pursuit of child abuse online and how we deal with cybercrime. If I may also then turn to Justin, just to flesh out just some of the threats as seen by your own unit. Justin, please.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I'd like to address 4 different areas. So around organised and serious crime, the activities of our organised crime groups. As you're all aware, in the last few years, there was a significant upsurge in activity around that area, and a lot of our work and resources went towards threat to life type operations, and you will have seen those and you will have read about them and seen the various convictions over the last number of years, but that has begun to recede. Naturally, we can't take our foot off the pedal on any of that, so we keep resources focused on those organised criminal groups, but the numbers of those type of operations are significantly reduced, so that's one particular development of note. However, in that whole sphere, our drugs operations continue apace, and you only have seen last week disruption of a significant cocaine distribution centre in the Longmire Road in Dublin 12. So that's one area. As the Commissioner referenced, obviously in the last few years we've seen significant increases in cyber-enabled crime. So this was obviously new crime that we previously didn't have. We've had to significantly pivot our resources in relation to that, and I think we've spoken here previously around resourcing around our Cybercrime Bureau and all the work we're doing around that. So that's obviously another huge change in the last few years. We've obviously seen absolute new crime types that we never dealt with before. There's obviously many of these, for example, sextortion. And next week we have a week of action and I suppose advice to the public around that area. The last area, I suppose, where we've seen, again, significant change, and we've had to adapt to that as well, is around the fraud activities. So they're obviously becoming far more complex, far more well organised. For example, now we see people who are absolute professionals in the tech area working with fraudsters to create elaborate schemes to deceive the public. And, you know, we've seen the groups that are behind these, they're international groups, and often they're using the same scheme and the same tactics, methodology across numerous countries. And the way, I suppose, that we're adapting to that now is we've many multi-jurisdictional organisations, and practically on a weekly basis, I have members of our fraud bureau travelling to Europol to work on joint operations for briefing, getting ready for days of action and that type of activity. So, like I said, that area really busy at the moment.
To gangs and sort of organised crime, and that has changed over the years. So, just wanted to confirm that with you. Yes.
Yeah, and I suppose I suppose the key point that I was making, what we did see was very structured groups, and you've seen these groups. You know, some of them are controlled from out of this jurisdiction, but highly organised. A lot of planning, a lot of preparation, a lot of money put behind some of these homicides. But we've seen a reduction in that. Now, while we still see homicides in that area, we've seen less structured ones, very much less structured in the particularly the last number of months.
And Commissioner, what you and Justin have set out is
are stretched, even as it is. But we have national bureaus who are dedicated to areas of crime, and as already been set out. At the same time then, we still have vigorous crime investigation at a divisional level, supported then by regional structures as well. So we haven't lost sight of the importance of crime investigation in terms of ongoing investment and ongoing improvement in respect of training and methodology. And I think as well then, you know, we've extended our scope in terms of transnational organised crime. And often we're protecting Ireland, in effect, offshore with our work then with other police services, law enforcement agencies and the like of Europol. So all of that's important as well. I think that one of the places we've made a big stride forward is in respect of cybercrime. And you know, we're engaged in international operations combating major ransomware attempts and major fraud attempts. So all of that is good, but it would be wrong for me not to say I would like more resources. There's more that we would wish to do, and we are an organisation which has huge demand placed upon us, and some of it is just in respect of the complexity of the crime we're also dealing with now, and that we're being targeted as well. Like, I think we're in a good place in terms of our expertise and our commitment and our success rate in terms of bringing perpetrators to justice. But there is more demand required of us, more required of us as an organisation. Public make that very clear to us at various JPCs and local engagements. So there's more that we want to do. But overall, I'd say we're in a good place.
okay, and I mean, your organisation has gone on to under quite considerable transformation through the operation model, where you've reduced to 19 divisions.
Yes.
Do you have evidence that that reduction in that model, that new operating model, has assisted the investigation of organised crime and serious crime?
Well, one of the primary objects of that was in respect of the standard of crime investigation overall across the whole country. And so the operating model is new in some places. For some divisions, it's the existing division with smaller changes, really. So we had a big disparity in the scale of what a division was and what a division could do. And I wanted to standardise that approach in respect of crime, the domestic abuse, investigation of serious sexual assault, etc. So there was a standardised approach, and we've done that through the protective services, divisional protective services units supported by a National Protective Services Bureau, but also then areas such as fraud, investigation, all supported then by a detective superintendent in each division. So a part of the rationale around the new divisional structure is each division is in effect an autonomous policing unit. It's the basic building block of how we provide a service. Service is provided through that division with regions and headquarters supporting that as necessary. So we're still rolling that out.
Divisions draw across each other if necessary, as well as from sort of the central source?
Well, that's within the remit of the regional assistant commissioners. They're the ones who assess the demand within divisions, and where a division needs particular assistance in respect of an event or an investigation, then it's for that regional assistant commissioner to resolve that, and if it's beyond their resources, then it then becomes a whole organisation problem, and the deputy here would resolve that then.
Okay, thank you. Over the past sort of 5 odd years, there have been a number of major reviews around investigation and serious crime, one being the homicide review, another a review on DNA. And the purpose of that was to render sort of greater efficiency and efficacy around those areas. What's your sense of where the organisation is in relation to dealing with homicide and DNA management?
Well, if I just turn to Justin here in 1 second, but I would say in respect of particularly homicide investigation, we have a very strong record in terms of bringing perpetrators to justice and following through with investigations, and that's been further supplemented in recent years around cold case review and peer review between senior investigating officers, investment in the senior investigating officer programme, but also investment then in the teams that conduct homicide investigations, a lot of that driven by the homicide review. And if I might turn, Justin, just a brief on where that review is and the DNA review, please, Justin.
Absolutely, Commissioner. So around the DNA, and obviously without going back over it all, because I know you're all familiar with it, I think the systems that we have in place now, the non-submission of samples is below, the current rate is below 0.5%. And there's very robust systems and governance around all that now. So I'm satisfied with the position we're in with that now. Obviously, we would want it at 0, but given the sheer numbers of them that are being processed, it's not unexpected that there would be slippage. But like I say, we have a robust system in place to catch those now. So as I say, around the DNA, I'm satisfied where we are with that. Around homicide review, so again, as you all know from some of the previous meetings, there's a couple of different areas around reviews. So one of the main things we wanted to do was look at how we conduct our reviews of major crimes. So that was a piece of work that was undertaken by our serious crime review team, basically to put in place a new process, how we go about reviewing investigations. So that was recently finalised. It's a 20-page document that I have. So I recently met with the teams dealing with that, and there's a number of changes to that. But in essence, where that is going is we're looking at how we undertake these reviews. So as you know, the whole review process started many years ago after the Yorkshire Ripper in the UK. So reviews, the whole point of reviews, homicide reviews, is to point the SIO, the Senior Investigating Officer, towards new lines of investigation. That's the whole point of it. It's not to reinvestigate it. As I said, we have our serious crime review team in place. Obviously, a serious crime review team can't review every single unsolved crime. So that's why we're putting in a system which will have different levels at it. Right from that top end SCRT, Serious Crime Review Team, down to peer-to-peer reviews undertaken by senior investigating officers. and that will be overseen by myself, who will be the commissioning officer for all reviews. And below that, there'll be a national coordinator who's a detective superintendent level. And then the other element around homicide reviews, and I think we briefly touched on it at the last authority meeting, was around domestic homicide reviews. So again, just I suppose for clarity, the difference with the domestic homicide review is that is a review of all actions up until the date of the homicide. It's not an investigation of the actual domestic homicide itself. It's a backwards review on all interactions that we as an organisation may have had with the victim before the death. And in many other jurisdictions, that's a multi-agency review, particularly in the UK, and supported by legislation. We don't have the legislation for that at the moment, so the reviews we undertake are confined to Garda Síochána. So how we do those are, in the case of a conviction for murder or manslaughter, in a domestic homicide where the motive is domestic homicide, and there has been a linkage of incidents before that. They're the cases we look at. And again, I've recently met with my team working in this area, and we've expanded the team in that area. We've I'm supposed to do more work in that area, and one of the things that we've made a decision around, we just need to formalise it in policy, is the length of time it takes us to do those. So at the moment, what we do, as I said, we wait for a conviction or acquittal in a domestic homicide case. So what we're looking at doing now is bringing that forward, or where there's lessons that we can be learned, and obviously not just for so how that would work is it will be another senior investigating officer that will re-look over a case that's a colleague has done. However, that SIO who's reviewing that case, he has to have training in peer-to-peer reviewing. So there's a training course for that. So I suppose we're looking at changing a great deal of how we do it at the moment. So I think it'll be something that I can definitely progress and update you in the coming months to where we are with it. It obviously has to be supported by policy and procedure. That'd be
very helpful. Thanks, Jonathan. And another key recommendation in the homicide review, and I know most of the recommendations have been closed and implemented, is the development of the investigative management system. And we know from previous conversations that some divisions have that at the moment and others don't. I suppose one of the questions is, how's that working? How's that helping the standard and consistency across the investigations? But the other aspect of that is that we've heard from engagement with divisions recently about concerns about how the extent to which that is an overload on them, and they are concerned both from those who have it working with them and those who are about to maybe to get it. So maybe you could comment on the extent to which you are reviewing on an ongoing basis the efficacy of that system. Thanks.
Thank you. So the IMS system, as you rightly said, it's in 5 divisions as we speak. There is quite a significant rollout process for it, which is coordinated by our Strategic Transformation Office. There's a full team. There's approximately 10 people in our IMS office who are involved in the rollout of that. The next division, or the next region that is due to move in, is my own, in organised and serious crime, and we put in place a training facility here in Dublin to deal with that, and training staff to deal with that. So everyone who is going to work with IMS receives training, particularly supervisors, because it's a supervisory. It's like a lot of new things coming in. You're right. There is people are concerned and they're worried about the amount of work it will. But the rollout process for it There's a lot of engagement with every division before it goes there. I think it's a 12 to 14 week period for that. As you rightly say, it does involve more time in front of screens, but that is time that would previously have been done using paperwork. So there is time in front of screens, but I mean the reality of any of our modern systems, we're moving to electronic, and that's the best way to, to manage and govern. And for us to look back, I mean, we've seen all the problems, and I know just a couple of minutes ago we spoke about reviews, and I see myself all the time with serious crime reviews, especially the big high-profile cases you'll all be familiar with. We see the problems going back and trying to locate paper and locate records and trying to understand the rationale why certain decisions were made and all those type of issues, which cause us huge problems. So obviously with something like IMS, we've got detailed records, why decisions were made, why things were done, full records, accountability for everything. So, I mean, there are huge benefits for it. But like I say, it's not unreasonable, not unexpected. People, can be worried if new systems are coming in. But like I say, I only recently had a briefing at my own PAF meeting with all my own chief superintendents, and we had people there from SDO explaining the process to us. As I say, although I'm the business owner for it, it's coming to my own area, so my own chief superintendents are starting that process now with the Strategic Transformation Office. So it's interesting from my point of view now to see it actually in my own area working. So, and the feedback that I've got from my chief superintendents is they're very happy with the interaction and the rollout process for it.
And just to confirm that there is extensive communication ongoing with divisions, both those that have it in terms of lessons learned and those about to get it.
Just in terms of, because I think I know what you're getting at, and that is actually the update to the system itself is, I think it's past its 20th iteration right now. I think we're around 22. And the reason for that is the extensive feedback from the field. I do know and appreciate and have heard myself at the levels of frustration and the idea that lower level cases required as much input as more serious crimes, and much of that has been rectified, and some new training has to go out there with respect to helping people to understand that, because at the inspector level, actually some of the pieces can be changed now to make it specific to the type of crime that you're dealing with. So that's one piece. The other piece of major feedback that is being responded to is the implication of putting it on an app. So I know that's being actively worked on right now. So again, from a mobility perspective, to give Gardaí access to it on their mobile devices when they're out and about. And then the third piece that we're looking at right now, we haven't actioned yet, but we are looking at it, is the opportunity potentially for civilianization of some pieces where there might be heavy administration, particularly in larger cases. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Moving on to the review of DNA, just a couple of quick questions. One is in relation to your sense of the awareness throughout the service of the importance of tracking biometric data and biometrics. And secondly, one of the recommendations was that the professional standards unit would go back in and dip sample and review, and I'm just wondering if that has happened, or if are there plans for that to happen? Thank you.
So I suppose on the awareness, absolutely. Recently on our own internal communication newsbeat, we sent out a particular piece about it, reminding members of Garda Síochána to submit the samples in the timeframes. At PAF meetings, it's one of the checks on incidents that's done. And our forensic coordination office, they regularly they have briefings and sessions around the country where they update divisions and regions about their responsibilities for the submission of samples. So I think there is good knowledge and good awareness around, and like I say, the submission rate is below 0.5%. So I think the message is in that they are being done, and people are aware of it. And the various reviews and all everything that went behind that, I think the organisation is well aware of that. So I think, from my point of view, again, I'm quite happy with the awareness around the organisation.
Okay, thank you. In relation to the professional standards unit, dip sampling?
Yeah, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I know dip sampling has been done, yes. If you want something more comprehensive, I can get that for
maybe
you.
can
Thank
come
you.
back to us on that. And just, Chair, just one last question. In all of these reviews, policies and practices have emerged, and been reviewed, and many of them, or each of them, have been reviewed from a human rights perspective. Could you say something about what impact that human rights review has had on those policies, what type of changes it has made, and maybe what the process has been? I know it's a big question, but maybe very briefly. Thank you.
Well, I don't have a specific example in front of me, but I do know it has had an impact, and certainly all of the policies have been reviewed. So in some this way, so there's a number of, I actually think the interesting thing about this process is it's becoming the norm. So that's why I'm struggling to find a scenario now where there would be significant changes, because it's actually becoming just part of business as usual. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe we could come back to you just on that one, because it just occurs to me, I only ever see the finished product, so I haven't seen the repaired or amended product, so perhaps we would need to, talk to our policy unit and those who are proofing it for human rights compliance, and they may be able to help us more.
In relation to the homicide review.
Sorry, which report, Debbie? Sorry.
Yeah, it arose from the Homicide Review Commissioner, and I think we, if you remember, commissioned some legal advice, I think jointly with the Garda in relation to the Article 2 applications of the Homicide Review. I think that was provided to you, and we asked for a response, but that was in January 22.
Well, we can follow through on that.
Commissioner O'Driscoll provided on the DNA question was the complexity of the HQ directives that underpinned that. And I wonder about the capacity of individual Garda members to absorb and you can perhaps reassure me that I may be wondering excessively about the capacity to keep up to date with the range of HQ directives across a whole gamut, which is I was just reminded of that aspect of John O'Driscoll's report in the context of that last exchange.
Well, and some of our procedures are dictated to us by the complexity of the underpinning legislation or regulation as well. And I don't think any one individual could say that they, have the encyclopedic knowledge of all that we have put out. How we would seek to address that is through supervision that's done at divisional level, between the PAF meetings, but also in terms of the standards, but also then sergeants and inspectors and their active supervision of the work that goes on. Going forward, actually, the introduction of IT systems, which will guide actually individuals in the correct direction, and so you can you can design, in effect, a very user-friendly interface which guides you through the policy by various decisions that you have to make as you go along through, and that's part of our design process in terms of our ICT systems, is that it guides members in terms of here's decision point, and what is your decision at this point, and then what leads on from that. And certainly the DNA process, it has been subject to a lot of scrutiny. It is very complex, but that is something which probably could benefit from a systems approach, and a systems approach then which guides members, because there are all sorts of pitfalls within it, and we recognise that. And that's why it's a continual subject at the divisional PAF meetings in terms of the performance. But we'll also get a lot of feedback as well then from FSI, Forensic Science Ireland, in respect of our performance as well. So we can quickly address problems as they arise.
Thanks very much. And it's very good that I wanted that these topics will not appear at meetings again, but that so much work has been done in relation both to the homicide review team's work and to the DNA report issue. A question before moving on to the next section, Commissioner, and that is arising from the references to capacity earlier. In the public discussion at the moment, there is considerable attention being paid to the numbers of Garda members, and particularly references being made to the number of people who resign from the organisation, let's say who leave before their retirement, their scheduled retirement. And two things struck me in looking at the data. The first was that in respect of recruitment, the impact of COVID and the consequent closure of the college, I think, has been underappreciated. And it's when one looks at the figures for 2020, 2021, 2022, the intentions of the Garda Síochána were to have 1,320 Garda members attested. And the actual achievement through those 3 COVID years was 776. The intention was to have 2,100 attested, and the actual number was 776. And even if you assume that there may have been difficulties in achieving the aspirational targets or the intended targets, that is still a very significant COVID overhang of possibly 800, 1,000 people. And I'm not sure that it is widely appreciated or filtered into the equations. And the second one was that the resignations last year, 2022, was 109 people, 1% of all Garda members, 1% of people of Garda rank, 0.8% of all Garda members. And I wonder whether it merits the level of attention that it is receiving.
The actual practical reality of coming through COVID, practically not being able to deliver training at the college, just completely inhibited our ability then to recruit. So our plans for the years 2020, 2021 came to naught. So really, you've set out the figures, and that is the reality. The people what we had in early 2020, you may remember we had to attest them and in fact close down the college as well. But those were extraordinary times, and we had to cope with an extraordinary demand. We also missed probably by a year our recruitment competition. We ran one in 2019. The next one then wasn't until 2022. So that was probably a year late as well. So we're suffering there on a number of fronts of missing that. Now we're picking up momentum again in terms of recruitment, but in a post-COVID job market. And a lot of things are happening in that job market. We're not the only organisation who's advertising for good staff, and we find that we're in competition with many other employers. We are a buoyant economy, and we have to have an offering which is attractive. But we're still getting good numbers of people applying to us in their thousands. We seek to relaunch another competition next month. And we seek to do that, in effect, on a yearly basis, on a rolling basis, so that we can meet the demand of every 11 weeks, bringing individuals, students into the college. But that slowdown in recruitment has to, and a good deal of that can be laid at the door of COVID, has to also be set against the cessations. Part of our practical issue is 40 years ago and 30 years ago, there were 2 sets of surges in recruitments in Garda Síochána. So we're finding people are getting to 30 years and retiring, or people are actually getting to age limit and retiring. And that has driven up some of the cessations in year. In terms of the actual resignations, given the scale of the organisation, last year was 109. In 2021, it was 95. In 2020, it was only 69. But I think 2020 is an odd year because there was nothing to resign to go to. But I think 2021 and 2022 are more like what our normal expectation would be. And as you say, that's a turnover of, it's not even 1%. So our turnover is low. We're low against any other major employer, and we're certainly low against any other of our neighbouring police services as well. So the crisis that is being portrayed actually isn't apparent in these numbers, and our recruitment is picking up, and we've had every support from government in terms of recruiting individuals, and as I say, we are launching a further recruitment competition in March. We do have a focus around diversity of the organisation. We want to see more from diverse communities apply. We want to see more women applying, and we want to see more a wider range across the socio-economic scale also applying to Garda Síochána as well. And we are a good employer. Terms and conditions haven't changed. As I said earlier, it's a very worthwhile and honourable profession, but at times a difficult one. And that is our offering to people, that we can offer a very fulfilling and worthwhile and developmental career. And that's where we are as an organisation.
Thank you, Commissioner. Can we move on then to the next item? And Paul is going to lead on the policing performance for 2022.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, Commissioner, so there are two topics, I suppose, that I'm going to deal with today. One is policing performance from last year, and then one is the report that the authority has just published this afternoon called What We Heard. But maybe first of all, asking about policing performance from 2022. Can you give us a sense of the challenges that faced in Garda Síochána last year?
I had a long list of highlights, but I'll move to the challenges. I think there's the number of challenges for us last year, just in effect, just moving out of the COVID period and demand starting to re-emerge, which had been suppressed for a couple of years. And we saw that in terms of road traffic collisions, both serious road traffic collisions and road traffic collisions where people were killed. And that was just very tragic development throughout 2021. And there's very concerning patterns of road traffic collisions carrying on into this year as well. We also see the re-emergence of other crime types around antisocial behaviour and crime types related to the nighttime economy, and that's in terms of assaults. We've talked there just about resources. I think one of our issues has been around resourcing. There's a lot of complex demand, an increasing amount of complex demand being placed on us as an organisation. And I've said repeatedly that as an organisation, as we go forward, between the complexity of the work we're doing and population growth, that we will be, as a police service, will need to increase in size over the coming years, actually to meet that. And we've spoke about our recruitment issues. We do face, likewise, difficult issues in respect of our Garda staff as well, and just in terms of length of time it takes to recruit Garda staff, but also then the amount of movement that there's been in and out of the organisation through mobility within the civil service as well. So increasingly our Garda staff, they're not there just for administrative functions, as important as they are there very much as well in terms of operational support roles. So that is certainly an issue which was apparent last year and which we'll seek to resolve this year and in the coming years as well. Our ICT investment was less than we had hoped for last year, but the increased budget this year will very significantly address that issue and move that forward. We had ongoing issue around accommodation. We had a huge bit of the Port Leash, and that will develop further this year. Our finance capacity, has to be said, is under some strain, and we are seeking to recruit further there, and we continue then to roll out the operating model. During COVID, that was difficult because it is a structural change that we would be delivering, as well as systems change. A lot of the backroom work, move away from change, just the evolution of the organisation to more information, more based in terms of a digital structure, information structure within Garda Síochána. That increases accountability and performance, but also then dealing with different demand and increasing population. All these are very significant and are some of the challenges that we faced last year, but those challenges are still here for the year ahead as well.
Okay, thank you very much for that. As you'll be aware, just earlier this afternoon, the authority published a report called What We Heard, which was based on our engagement with communities across the state in 2022. Elements of that report might make uncomfortable reading for the Guards, but others as well, though there are quite a lot of positives in it, and it's quite clear from the report that communities want the Guards to be engaged with them and relating to them, and there's also a clear recognition that the Gardaí can't solve every problem that beset local communities. You've had some time, I think, now to read the report and to digest it. What's your reaction to it?
We very much acknowledge and welcome the amount of work that's gone into this. It is feedback to us in terms of the service that we provide, and as such, that feedback has to be analysed, addressed, and responded to. I would say that our policing plan of last year and rolling into the policing plan of this year addresses a lot of the concerns which are raised within the report, and we ourselves are obviously out in public forum of all sorts, and we would hear similar commentary, etc., being made to us. I suppose there are incidents relayed which are of concern, and we'd hope that if individuals had such serious incidents that they wish to raise, that they would do so either at their local Garda station, or indeed if they wish to make a public complaint to the office of the Garda Ombudsman. But beyond that then, I think we want to positively engage with it, see how our policing plan then would address that going forward in terms of the rollout of the operating model, our concentration on community policing, our concentration on domestic abuse, highlights inconsistencies. Part of the rationale of the model was to drive out those inconsistencies and make sure that individuals get a professional and responsive service wherever they are in the country. So that's an important element of the work that we wish to undertake. And then I would point out to the work that we've done in terms of drugs intimidation, our involvement with the DRIVE project, and also our appointment in every division of inspectors specifically to liaise on this issue. But we do recognise some of the feedback that's being raised, that those are points of learning for us, and I've responded to you this morning, but you won't have an opportunity to see that response. But I think going forward, in terms of our assessment of our performance throughout the year, and what your assessment is as well of that performance, the document provides a benchmark in terms of things and issues that we wish to see to have addressed.
Okay, thank you. And maybe ask a couple of questions about some of the issues that you raised there. Excuse me, and I suppose the first one is in relation to community policing, because one of the clear messages, I think, in the report is that it underlines the vital nature of the role of a community guard. But it again suggests, and it isn't the first time we've heard this, or I'm sure you've heard it, that that role is seen as having less value than others within the organisation. What can you say to the public to dispel that view?
Well, very practically, I have put my money where my mouth is in terms of the resources that we've put to this. Our commitment to rural policing, for instance, which we do regard as a community policing service, and our commitment then to rolling out the operating model and staff, and then the community policing teams that we've developed. But not everybody is suited for community policing, and it's in itself. It is in some ways a specialist area in terms of the skills needed in problem solving, building relationships, building trust, and all of that. We would say we have a community policing framework that we've rolled out. We've rolled out training modules, and there's support and guidance then provided from Paula's team in terms of the Community Engagement Bureau. So there's a lot of work has happened there in respect of that. We do engage with relevant community groups at a local level, but also then national forum as well. And so there's a lot that we've undertaken, and maybe, Paula, can you set out just some of the detail of what your work has been around community policing?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Yes, we do continue to roll out the framework and to support those divisions that have it rolled out formally, but even with other divisions where it hasn't, a lot of the principles of community policing in the framework are already in place. In total, there are 22 divisions, some still within the old divisional model, that we've rolled out that framework. But most importantly as well, it is that engagement that both from the National Bureau then down to local level. And one thing we're really keen to get delivered this year is the access that people can look up their local Garda on the website. So that is really one of the priorities for this year, because visibility sometimes isn't always that necessarily. It is both visible on the street, but knowing how to contact us and who to contact. So that's one of the key areas of work this year as well. As the Commissioner said, there is a training programme, again, that supports it, that our community Gardaí are completing. But also, it's how we can also empower and give people the necessary equipment as well. So we've rolled out over 600 mobility devices to community guards. We now have set up workshops with them in the same way we did with roads policing, to see what apps and what information that we can use and have on the mobility phone that really helps. So, for example, one of the key things we're looking at first is how we can collate schools programmes rather than written returns. That can be done on the mobility device. So, with over 600 devices, we kept the principle and the learning from COVID with the vehicles. So the branding of the community vehicles that we have, over 130 of those. So those sort of structures in place as well to really enable support and actually give us that sort of brand of community policing as a brand as well, and as a specialism that it is.
Okay, thank you, Assistant Commissioner. And I mean, you've touched there on one of the issues that again was raised in the report, which is in relation to how local communities can access their local guard, and you're right that visibility isn't just about being on the street, although that seems to be for a lot of communities a big part of it. But one of the starkest, I suppose, issues that came out from the report, and Commissioner, you mentioned it earlier, is in relation to very high levels of antisocial behaviour, drug-related intimidation, to the extent that some respondents told us that, you know, they kept children indoors at particular times of the day, that they were so frightened in relation to drug-related intimidation that they couldn't organise community meetings. And I think one of the frustrations that came through was that people were telling us that the people responsible for this was a relatively small group of individuals. And the complaint essentially was that there was a limited policing response to that. And one respondent used the phrase, "Why can't the Guard?"
Taking on these mid-level dealers who do depend on drug debts actually for part of their business model as well. So the part of this is driven by their business model, and secondly, maybe a small number of individuals, but the ruthlessness and recklessness and callousness of which they conduct their business in terms of their criminal attacks on individuals is well known. We have, I think, a well-oiled machine in terms of complaints that have been made to us. We have had arrests and charges. The offence of drugs-related intimidation isn't on the statute book, and so we see other offences obviously then being charged. And so perhaps the public aren't aware of our successes that we've had around individuals, you know, practically en route to conduct some form of intimidation or attack type incident. We do work very closely with the Drive initiative, which was launched by Minister of State for Public Health in November 2021. So that is where we're active in terms of working with other agencies, but then secondly then our own operational response in terms of intimidation. Maybe Justin, can you come in just on the work with Drive there, please?
Thanks, Commissioner. So I think the Commissioner touched on a really important point, that intimidation is a really important part of the drugs business. So that intimidation goes right up to murder and all the way down to low-level intimidation. And it is a difficult matter for us to investigate, and I'll give you a simple example of why. There are some cases where individuals get into drug debt. That drug debt is then sold on to somebody else, And then, so the people themselves may not even know who's trying to enforce the drug debt. So that just shows you on a practical level how difficult that is to investigate. And we've done a number of things related to it. So firstly, on Pulse, we now have a motive for drugs intimidation, so we can identify those various incidents. As the Commissioner rightly said, they can be all types of different incidents, from criminal damage to assault, to public order issues on the street. So we're now trying to identify as many of those incidents as we can as drugs-related intimidation. The awareness around our response to drugs-related intimidation, I believe, is good. And again, I'll give you a very practical example. If you type in drugs-related intimidation, trained in how to deal with drugs-related intimidation, that list is regularly updated. It was only updated this month again, so we're trying to keep that current. And those inspectors in some divisions have allocated more than one inspector to that role. So that's a locally made decision that divisional officers will make. A key part of the work that they do, as the Commissioner said, is engaging with partners. So that's at JPCs, local groups, the wider intergovernmental project, the DRIVE project. So we get referrals from all sorts of manner of direction around drugs-related intimidation. And again, the reality of this really vile type of crime is that when people come to us, we have to we treat it absolutely confidentially. We meet people on all sorts of venues. People don't have to come to Garda stations. There's all sorts of different routes that we can engage with them. It doesn't have to be in person. It can be on phone, all sorts of different ways. And when we meet people or families who are in these situations, we set it out exactly what their different options are. We explain everything to them, and whatever route that they want to go with it, we'll absolutely support them. So there are some people who decide that they don't want to go down the criminal justice route, and I mean, there are obvious reasons for that. We support them, we'd advise them, and those who do go down the criminal justice route, we explain to them how that will work, and we'll support them in that. But like I said right at the start, it's a really difficult crime area to deal with, and I know from speaking to colleagues in other jurisdictions, they have the exact same problem with drugs-related intimidation. It's just part and parcel of that business.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I suppose, I mean, obviously we recognise that this is a very complex matter, and it's not something that can be resolved solely by the Guards, or indeed, you know, in a particularly speedy fashion. But one of the clear problems at the base of this is the demand for drugs. And one thing that again came out of the report that we've published, and indeed has been reported widely in the media over the last sort of 18 months, I think, is that in certain areas, particularly in Dublin, on a Friday afternoon, there are office workers visibly visiting certain areas to get drugs for the weekend. Now, if residents can see that, can't they expect a policing response? Is that disrupted by the Gardaí? And if it's not, is that a decision not to disrupt it?
Thanks, Commissioner. So I suppose in terms of what you describe, there are particular communities that are more impacted by this type of behaviour than others. And just one example, in the South Inner City, there was complaints of the type you describe. So we have put particular plans in place in particular communities to disrupt that type of behaviour, and we absolutely do not turn a blind eye to it. So we've had significant success in one particular estate within the south inner Dublin city. I won't say the place, but exactly what you describe, people not from the locality coming to purchase drugs, and in fact the people selling the drugs not from that locality either. So we've put particular operations in place. We've had significant success in that, and we have many people before the courts in relation to distributing drugs. And I suppose the message really is that that office worker or, you know, upstanding member of the public, by their taking that line of cocaine at the weekend, they're contributing to the organised crime that wants to provide any information to us on a confidential basis, and particularly around that intimidation piece, because we really recognise that it isn't particularly the individual that might be involved in selling drugs that becomes the victim. It's actually their families, because they're the ones that seem to have this perceived ability to pay. So that's where the intimidation comes. So it's actually a victim that's not really doing it against a perpetrator. But there are certainly many other ways that we can tackle that situation and support that individual and those communities impacted.
Thank you very much, Assistant Commissioner. And the final topic that I wanted to ask under this issue, Commissioner, I suppose goes back to what Assistant Commissioner Willis talked about there, because I think you opened that by saying that, you know, this problem had been reported to yourselves from the local community, and I just wonder how does the organisation pick up those concerns from local communities? I know you have the JPCs and stuff, but they tend to be at a higher level.
Engagement with the local communities, but we have set out in terms of just our local meetings and local engagement and our policy in respect of that we would regularly engage with local partnerships to receive feedback on the service provided, and also obviously then to receive information. If I could ask Paul and just outline just what the progress is in that, please, Paul.
Yes, certainly we will through both at the national level, but then down to the local level, our community Gardaí right across the country will speak to any group at, you know, however very local, right up to then middle engagement levels and up to the national. We have encouraged both also the development of Garda clinics, where we will hold those meetings ourselves, and they can be, you know, there's a framework and under the community policing, and guards go out and they can be meeting people, as we saw one of our projects on the park benches during COVID, but also in really any location whatsoever to do that outreach, because it is, you know, as we've recognised and said in this report, how we hear what are people's lived experiences, because it's only through them having their voice and how we can hear those voices. Another thing we're doing as well, and it related to earlier, you talked about, again, antisocial behaviour and things happening, and perhaps people, so those people who do want to meet us, but those who want to report anonymously, we're going to build on the project that was run in Tralee, See Something, Say Something, which is text messaging. It is totally anonymous, so it's been operational in Tralee now for quite a period of time. It's now going to be rolled out right across Kerry, but also the community safety partnerships. So the work we're doing with the 3 newly established community safety partnerships as well, and Drogheda Implementation Board, they're keen to roll that out as well. So we're going to actually roll it out next in Drogheda and in Longford as part of the rollout of that work, and that will allow people at that local level the reports are received locally, and then local Gardaí, overseen by the community engagement superintendents, can respond to those local needs. And we will, that's the sort of immediate term. Medium term, it will be rolled out more fully as part of CAD 2, so we'll have a total national rollout. And then alongside that, you know, we actually do hear a lot as well, you know, going to national meetings, that we also hear a lot of local information, and then what we ensure we do, myself and my teams, is that is then fed back through the divisional structure, because we do hear at those meetings certain very, very good information about what people want us to address in terms of crime and where things are happening. So really it's both a top down and bottom up, but you know, it is important, and we want to ensure that the communities we serve, that we're hearing their voices.
Thank you. And just finally, because one of the issues that surfaced in relation to the JPC discussion was that community fora that used to be more prevalent, I think, some of them had died in the wake of COVID, and there was a desire, a recognition that those had worked, at least some of them had worked quite well, and there was a desire to get those back up and running. Is that part of the strategy that you've discussed?
Certainly, yes, as well. And I think it's having that agility that what fits one area, you know, maybe a city environment to the rural environment, but you know, as many of those that we can, and certainly any help that we can bring nationally, but also sharing good practice. So we do support and encourage that. We have also, as part of the framework, a go-to section work of good practice and good examples of local problem solving for us, and that's available to all our community Gardaí as well. So certainly through
drugs unit. So these are basically people that they're in the same station, their offices are often beside each other, and those community Gardaí are the people out on the street, and they're meeting the groups and they're meeting people, and they're picking up information all the time, and that passing on of information, that dissemination of information to drugs units, that's how often they run and mount those operations that Angie described, and you were talking about people selling in particular areas. It's there's a perception that this is often driven by surveillance or covert manner or informants. Often it's information that we pick up from the public via the community Gardaí. That's one of the most important sources of that information that Paula and Angie have spoken about.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioner and colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. And can I just pick up on two aspects of the points that have just been spoken about? And all that has been said is extremely important and informative and useful. One of the things that has been said to us consistently, not just in the preparation of this document, but over the years, is that for many people who live in circumstances where the intimidation can be immediate, intrusive, direct in people's faces, as it were, that there can be an insistence on seeing their mobile phones so that the intimidators can establish whether or not people have actually been engaging with the Gardaí, so that even an anonymous text line isn't an option that's available to them. And that the exploration of opportunities for safe places to meet, casual engagements, presence, I don't know, your skill set is deeper than mine in relation to this, but in shopping centres or supermarkets where there can be, as I say, engagements in safe places where people can have, or where Gardaí attend in community centres, and you don't have to go to a Garda station, you don't have to do anything visible. And the second was on that very specific issue of the role of community Gardaí, and it's an issue that arises in every organisation that has, say, in movement and transition of people move to other assignments, and ensuring that there's continuity of contact and continuity of service to a community. Is there any possibility that some consideration can be given, even recognising the complexity of assignment of Gardaí, to an overlap, so that there can be a visible transition, as it were, from a well-established person with whom communities may have established very close relations and the inheritor of that responsibility? Because it's a point that's made to us frequently, that somebody who has been deeply appreciated, very involved, well-known, moves for whatever perfectly proper and valid reason, and replaced by somebody whom they don't know, and there hasn't been a period of crossover or transition. I wonder, is it something that you've thought about can be affected in some way?
Thanks, Chair. So just addressing your first point in terms of the safe places for community members to go and see, we're acutely aware of that. And I suppose that's why we have the Garda clinics, and we're constantly looking at new opportunities and locations where we can have those clinics for the very reasons that you outlined there, so that they are, I suppose, less formal and certainly not at a Garda station. So that's something that's very much on our radar. The second point, in terms of that succession planning and the overlap, in an ideal world, that would absolutely be what we would want to do. But I suppose it would be difficult to give a guarantee around it because of the complexity and the demands across the organisation. And I suppose on the other hand, then, movement is good, and it's good to have fresh blood and fresh impetus in a location as well. So in as much as there can be a downside to movement, I would see a lot of positives as well, because if there's one thing I've learned throughout my career, is that change is good and movement is good. Thank you.
To live is to change, said John Henry Newman. The next item, Shalom is going to lead on the issue of policing performance in the current year. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair.
issue, not to talk of the business impact that there has been. So from our perspective in Garda Síochána, we're investigating each and every one of these incidents. And you'll be aware there are 2 people before the courts. There are a number of other investigations that are at various stages of progress. We have extensive area in the context of protecting the critical infrastructure that it is. So there are a lot of moving parts to this. But just to assure everybody that we do take these investigations, these incidents very seriously. They're all extensively investigated, and we will continue to do that.
So is it your view that the legislation is sufficient for you to investigate these suspected crimes?
Well, yes, we've our existing legislation has led us to 2 individuals being charged, and obviously I can't say any more about that. And it also enables us to carry out inquiries and report matters to the GPP and seek directions to prosecute.
And do you think there's a need for maybe greater regulation around the sale of drones, or required training for people who buy or use them? Is there a need for something to encourage more responsible use?
Well, I suppose there are 2 things. There is an obligation on drone owners to register them, and perhaps there is something about maybe. More communication around that, from an industry-wide perspective, so that everybody is completely aware and that there's no gaps in terms of their responsibilities. So that's something that can always be improved. And certainly from our perspective, we are very resolute in terms of what our responsibility to investigate is and to prevent in terms of our patrols, etc.
And you said you're working with the DAA and other organisations, but are you also, is there a crossover with the work that the airport police do?
Well, the airport police have a very different role and function. So we're the organisation established under the Garda Síochána Act under Section 7 that are tasked with investigating all crime within the state. The airport police have no role in terms of investigating crime.
Okay, so there haven't been any issues, have there, there being that distinction between the airport police and Garda Síochána in relation to the policing of drone use?
Well, in terms of, if I can speak generally, there is, an ongoing conflict, I suppose, really, or tension in that the use of the word police in the airport police for some people is confusing. If you're a person who's travelling through the airport and you see somebody who's in uniform and police isn't their title, it's not unreasonable that that individual might think that they're actually talking to the guards when they're not. So for us, it is a constant challenge, and it's not an ideal situation. And in legislation, they're described as authorised officers. So perhaps that may be a more appropriate title for them.
Yes, and I think approximately a year ago, the Commissioner told us that there was some work going to be done in terms of clarifying the roles, because there is that confusion potentially in the minds of the public. Has there been any work done on that, and can you update us on it, please?
Well, there has been communication with the Department of Transport. Department of Transport. So that communication and engagement is ongoing, but no resolution has been arrived at just yet.
Okay, and do you see instances where that confusion is impacting investigations?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, and with adverse consequences, for example, do people think that they have reported matters to Garda Síochána when they have actually reported to airport police, and they think they've made a criminal complaint where they haven't?
Yes, there have been instances of that.
Okay, so it's a serious problem, and there's a role for the public to be made aware that there is that distinction, and if a crime takes place, that they should report it to the Garda Síochána.
Yes, and the other thing to say in that regard, we have a Garda station at the airport, Dublin Airport. We're operating 24/7, and we have a presence in and around the airport. So yes, we are aware of instances where crimes weren't reported to us, and that particular issue is subject to an ongoing audit and investigation.
And is that nearly finished, or what stage is that audit at?
No, it's only starting, to be honest. We have the initial phase, but really that's only very much the beginning, so I'm not in a position to give you any detail in that regard.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to seeing that when it comes. But are there also any issues with the use of detention powers by the airport police, in your experience?
So as part of the audit that's going on currently, all such matters will be explored and considered. So in due course, we'll revert to you in that regard.
Okay. I might move on then, if I can, to the area of protests and the policing of protests. And firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge that this has been a very challenging area for the Garda Síochána in recent times, and they have been faced and handled with great forbearance and professionalism, high levels of verbal and physical aggression, and it must be extremely challenging for people to have to face that in the course of their work. So we would like to acknowledge that. I wonder if you could tell me a bit about the approach that you have to date in policing protests, the ongoing protests that we see. And maybe you could incorporate into that your strategy for policing protests if they continue into the future, and what your strategy is.
Okay, thank you. So I'll start off, and I'm going to bring the Assistant Commissioner, the DMR, who has the lion's share, unfortunately, of the protests. So in general, our approach is that we try and engage with the organisers in the first instance. Now, that's not always possible because it may not be apparent who the organiser is, but that would always be our starting point. So to try and reach some common ground and agree some principles around that, and where that opportunity is afforded to us, it invariably works better. So side by side with that, then we'll obviously assess whether or not what the available intelligence is in terms of the propensity of the organisers for violence or not, as the case may be. In many cases, the ultimate objective of protesters is peaceful protest, and that has to be said as well. The number of people who actually engage in any sort of unruly behaviour, to put it that way, is limited. Not that said, we are, in recent past there have been occasions, and we have had to, respond accordingly. And I suppose sometimes people may think that we don't take any action there and then, but that doesn't mean that there isn't follow-up action. We have to make a judgment call in the context of our available resources, whether it's more appropriate to take immediate action or to do follow-up action. So that's a judgment call dependent on a great many things. So I go to Angela now in the context of the, I suppose, standard approach to planning for the protests and our response.
Thanks, Deputy. So I suppose just to put some context on it, so we've been measuring how many protests we have had to respond to over the last number of years. So we have seen an increase in the volume and the frequency of protests, particularly in Dublin, over the last while. So in 2021, we policed 395 protests for the 12-month period. In 2022, that was 307 protests. And already up to last night, we're at 115 this year, just in the Dublin region. And just for another bit of context, last year at the same time, we were at 30 protests. So it's an exponential increase. I suppose the vast majority of the protests that we are responding to at the moment, we could broadly describe them as sort of anti-immigration sentiment. So in responding to the protests, we've created a specific operation to coordinate and record all of that pertinent information around protest activity. We obviously recognise the right to peaceful protest, and that extends to the expression of views that sometimes may not, they could be described as controversial or unpopular. But we're very mindful of the importance of the right to peaceful protest in a democratic society. So I suppose for us, in order to ensure that we can strike the right balance when we're upholding competing rights, that's the rights of the protesters and the rights of the people that can be impacted by that activity, we ensure that our plans are prepared to ensure that we provide a proportionate response at all times. And we recognise that on occasion we may have to intervene where protest activity is reaching the area of criminality. So our overall, we have an overall strategy across the region, and that provides guidance then at a divisional level so that we can have a consistent approach to our policing. And that's informed, as the Deputy has said, by the intelligence we have, the information we have, and the engagement that we have, or maybe sometimes don't have, with those that are organising protests. Another part of the strategy is, because a lot of the protests are centred around accommodation centres, we have appointed liaison inspectors in each of the divisions to liaise with the accommodation, the management in the accommodation centres. We also have a lot of support from Paula's people in the Diversity Bureau around providing support to individuals that are accommodated in the centres. And then I suppose we're guided by, at the end of the day, our strategy is to provide a lawful and proportionate policing response to protests, and that's just balancing everybody's rights and trying to uphold everybody's rights in a very challenging environment, and very challenging for our members, as has been described, some very unpleasant scenes for our members, and of course for people that can be impacted by the behaviour of a few, it has to be said. We have a number of prosecutions before the courts, and obviously we can't speak any further about those. And they're from incidents that have arisen, either during a protest or maybe on the fringes of the protest. We will always try to work.
Do you have a figure for that, Assistant Commissioner?
We certainly have. There are small numbers, so maybe less than 10, but a number of investigations underway around other activity that has arisen. And as the Deputy has said, just because we don't take action on a particular night because of, maybe the particular behaviour of a lot of individuals that might be present, it doesn't mean that there isn't follow-up afterwards. And in that regard, we have a number of investigations that are advancing, and there's no doubt there will. After consultation with the DPP, I'm confident that there will be further prosecutions arising out of behaviour of particular individuals. But again, it has to be said, the vast majority of people that engage in protest activity are exercising their right to do that, and it's in a peaceful manner.
Can that still, though, have an impact on vulnerable groups and individuals? So even in the instances where it's peaceful and lawful, is there still a balancing act to be undergone because you have particularly vulnerable people in these accommodation centres? Absolutely,
and that's why we try to engage with the organisers, and we try to ensure that impact is kept to an absolute minimum. And
has that been successful, that interaction with the community, with the organisers?
To a large degree, yes, but there are occasions when we might have very little or no notice of a protest, or we see the type of activity or the type of organising changing, even as late as last night. The strategy of the protesters is actually changing, and it's constantly changing and adapting, and that's why by coordinating all of the activity we can then inform ourselves for future response plans.
And do you have any sense if these protests are going to keep going, or have the organisers and participants felt that they've made their point at this stage, or do you think that this is going to be a medium to long-term issue?
It certainly will be a medium-term issue, if not long-term. We have no sense that they're finished
Is
yet.
that having an impact on resources? Can you put a cost on it, what it's costing on Garda Síochána to police these protests?
So it is a significant additional cost because we obviously have a graduated response, but we have to have the ability to respond should things get out of hand. So that will involve having public order units on standby should they be required. On occasion, they have been required, but thankfully, generally not. And again, we base, our deployment of resources on risk, on a risk assessment of the information that we have and of the individuals that are involved. And I suppose one of the more challenging pieces that we have to deal with is where we have maybe a counter protest. So you might have an anti-immigration protest, and then you might have people that are in support of migration and immigration. So that's where it can become more complex, where we're trying to maybe keep two opposing sides apart to ensure that there's no...
Do you have any figures for how much it's costing in monetary terms?
I don't have the monetary terms, but I know that we have deployed an additional 400 members since January of this year in support of protest.
Presumably that means they're either pulled from other areas of policing or there's overtime implications.
Exactly. So sometimes we will take them from existing resources. So that's a combination of existing resources and then people brought in on to work additional tours.
So are you seeing an impact on other areas now of policing suffering as a result of this and being stretched?
We're stretched, but I suppose we are still managing at the moment.
Okay. Do you see a role for your community policing units to work with the communities that are impacted, and is that working in your view?
Yes, so we absolutely, there is a role there for community members with the communities, working with communities, and I think it's that reassurance piece, and that seems to be for some communities a concern around the impact that a particular change in their locality might have for them, that what that means to them. So we're engaging with them. We're continuing with the schools programme with support from Assistant Commissioner Hillman's teams, and we're trying to just alleviate those concerns and support the integration of new communities into the existing communities within the city.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shalom. Just before leaving that to move on to the final element of this afternoon's meeting, could I just ask two supplementary questions, if I may? In respect of the Gardaí assigned to the Garda station in Dublin Airport, do the Garda members have freedom of access to patrol in terminals on landside and airside? Okay, so that's their parish, as it were.
Yes, they have full airside access for their policing duties and would regularly patrol the terminals. That's part of their responsibility.
Thank you. And the second point is, which more related to the latter question. As you know, the Chief Executive and I have been visiting the divisional offices, chief superintendents and some of their senior colleagues, and hope to have completed that process with the geographical divisions by Easter, and then engage with some of the specialist units after Easter. But one of the things that took me by surprise was that, and I just wonder whether this is a universal experience, that the Gardaí appear not to be, the Garda Síochána appear not to be routinely involved in any discussion about the choice of locations where asylum seekers or refugees may be accommodated, and are not necessarily given any notice of the arrival of people. Is that a universal thing, or was that an exceptional thing that had arisen?
Well, I think in the initial stages the pressure to find accommodation was such that those who were charged with finding accommodation were just literally doing their very best in that regard. Whenever the protest activity started, then we have received under secret cover a full location of migrants and where all that they are being housed at this moment, and we didn't have that information before that, so therefore there hadn't been in effect a consultation process. But we have learned a lot in terms of just some of the expressions of community concern around how various housing facilities are populated, etc., and what seems to work best. So we've been able to provide that feedback as well. So there's good. Since the protests have started, there's certainly lines of communication opened up, and we've good communication now with those making the placements. Yes.
Thanks, Commissioner. And the final item this afternoon on the agenda is the policing plan for 2023, which, as you know, which you and the organisation prepared considerable consultation with the authority, and that was approved at the December meeting, has been submitted to the Minister for Justice, whose consent is required by statute. Would you give an indication, and particularly in the context of some of the conversations we've had this afternoon, would you want to say something to the public about the way in which you think that policing plan will have an impact on them, or influence them, or will reassure them in terms of the engagement and priorities of the organisation? I'm not implying that they need reassurance on a continuing basis, but we'll just at least give them some sense of what your priorities are across the year for 2023.
This is the second of 3 annual plans that sets out our priority activities against the strategic objectives. And I think there's a few things I wish to highlight. One, that we wish to be human rights compliant in all that we do. We wish to, through recruitment, increasingly reflect the diversity that we find within society. And I've already spoken about gender, but also socioeconomic class, as well as race. I think those are important elements for us. As we've highlighted already, we do strive to be responsive to local community needs. We have a continuing recruitment to, continued commitment to rural policing, as well as the policing of cities and urban centres, and also then just being responsive to development trends at a national and international level. A lot of what we've set out in our plan, actually, you could almost think it's no coincidence that what you've reported and what we heard is actually what's reflected as well in the policing plans in terms of the consultation we engaged. And so there is a good crossover between the feedback you've been getting and where we would want to concentrate. You know, so we've specifically mentioned safety in the community, drug-related intimidation, our ongoing work then with the drug-related intimidation and violence engagement project, ongoing emphasis in working with partners at international, national and local level, and increasingly at an international level we are gaining partnerships. We're expanding to Abu Dhabi and Bangkok this year in terms of the liaison officer process, and also then there's a real thirst with other law enforcement agencies and police services to work with us and to learn from our experience as well. And the emerging group Ameripol in South and Central America, but also US federal law enforcement, all very keen to work with us on live investigations, and not describe it as transactional, but a lot of this is actually about, you know, us pulling our efforts and making sure that we get law enforcement public good effect somewhere, and if it's not here, that actually we feel some benefit as well from that. But we are recognised as experts in lots of areas, but we want to share that knowledge and share the experiences with others and also learn from them. We've talked as well about the community policing framework. That's picked up in this year's annual plan as well. We've mapped every division in terms of community policing areas. The framework for community policing will be finalised in 2023, and we'll review its impact in 2023 and lessons learned. Training's ongoing as well. Mental health issues, including those taking their lives, has seemed to be a heavy burden on the organisation. A lot of responsibility has been thrust upon us. We've responded with the CAS pilot, which we are in development in close collaboration with HSE, because some of these problems actually are way beyond our expertise and do require properly mental health intervention, and this has seemed to be the best way by which sort of live policing events can actually have a suitable mental health intervention as well. So we'll see that develop throughout 2023. More work required around the DPSUs. They're established. We want to do a review this year in 2023. We'll also review the domestic abuse risk assessment tool. So we want to see the consistency, we want to just check the consistency of service, but also the demand, because demand in some areas has grown very considerably. So there is an issue around resourcing and staffing of those units. The domestic abuse risk assessment tool across 3 regions already, and training underway in DMR here, and actually well developed. So again, we've done enough with that to be able to take feedback on it and, you know, respond directly then to some of the comments made in your own report, but also develop it further as well. And that tool itself was the subject of very considerable consultation and developed with other countries in terms of that had introduced such a tool, but also with academics as well. So we do want to know how well that's actually done out on the ground. So I think we just need to be adaptive in this incoming year. A lot of crime, as we've already said, is constantly evolving very quickly in a digital age. You don't really have to leave your bedroom to be engaged in very serious criminality of many sorts. So that's part of the reality of policing, is that it's not just now in public spaces, it is in very private spaces in terms of crimes around vulnerability or crimes conducted on the internet. But we have to equip ourselves in terms of coping with that as well, and at the same time maintain that strong link with the community, strong sense of community service, and continue to maintain and grow trust and confidence in the organisation as well. And that dictates a lot of the success that we have as a policing service, and we all recognise that as well. So there's a lot of challenges for us in the year ahead. Maybe haven't changed so much from 2022, but still they are the challenges that we face as a policing service. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Do you think there is a need for, or could be value in, a new approach to a communications engagement with the public to convey a sense of the breadth of the activities, for example, on a specific issue, to identify the significance of the remarkable successes that you have had in relation to disabling, interdicting organised crime gangs and supply of drugs, for example, and being able to relate that to the impact that is having on the availability or distribution of illicit drugs to communities?
Thank you. One of the dilemmas for us in this is that we are having very considerable success around the seizure of drugs, seizure of money, and all of that there. At the same time, we know internationally we're a target for transnational organised crime groups, and that includes drug trafficking. We can see developments across the globe around the movement of illicit drugs, and we're not immune from that. The rise of the use of fentanyl, for instance, in North America, the addiction and problems that surround that, but also then the huge risk of death from fentanyl-type products. So no, we're not immune from these things. So whenever we are talking about this, it's always with a mind to what the next threat is coming in terms of illicit drugs. We put an awful lot out in terms of just our successes. It's well reported, I think, on social media. It's well reported in the media as well. I just sometimes worry that some of that is glorified a little by the use of, nicknames and, certain, just in the manner in which some of it can be perceived. And we don't want to create actually a false narrative around people living, in effect, a lifestyle supported by drugs, which is far in excess of what happens. So we are careful about this. As we said earlier, the whole of the drugs industry is dictated by intimidation and fear and violence, right from the very top to the very bottom, and that's what it pervades. And so when we talk about it, we also are conscious of just the amount of public harm there is here in Ireland. And having recently visited Colombia, you can see actually the very great harm that's been done to that nation, and also the diversification there is there in terms of crime beyond drug dealing into illegal logging, illegal mining, and human trafficking on a huge scale. So we are doing our very best around this. We want to protect people here in Ireland from illicit drugs, which are very dangerous, and people are being reckless. And dare I say, the weekend demand, which isn't recreational, but the weekend demand is driving the profit and driving demand in this. It's not that demand would not be sustained in working class communities. It is other communities, affluent communities, who are in effect creating the profit margin in this and bear a huge responsibility for the demand here and the destruction it causes, but the destruction it causes elsewhere. So these are difficult messages, Bob, to tell you, to get across all the time. And we do get into this, seizures and money and all of that whenever there's a huge underlying global issue here. And, I think talking to people in Central America, they're just amazed at how, in effect, ignorant people are here of the huge impact it has there, huge detrimental impact it has, and why should they be? Like we live in a world where there is plenty of information. People are blind just to the destruction they're causing elsewhere.
I'm reminded of an advertising campaign that the PSNI, perhaps in conjunction with other agencies of government, had in Northern Ireland, bus stops, bus shelters around Belfast, with a message that was something like, paramilitaries pretend to support you, they want to control you. And it was a very, very powerful image and a very powerful, simple but powerful message. And on the question of communications, in your monthly report, it was interesting again to see the number of occasions on which officers of the organisation had been participating in public media, and already in February there have been a number of notable contributions, not least by your distinguished self, but significant, effective contributions which are, I think, invaluable to people's increased awareness both of the risks that face them and of the messages that the Garda Síochána have. If any of my colleagues have any final question to ask. Please, Elaine.
Commissioner, earlier you made reference to one of the challenges for Garda Síochána being road safety, and there was a report published this week by the Motor Insurance Bureau of Ireland, which you more than likely are very much aware of, which said that approximately 200,000 drivers out there are uninsured, and about 10,000 are detected yearly by the guards. And I know that there is new technology coming on stream by Garda Síochána to detect uninsured drivers. And I'm just wondering, have you any response to that report or any further information as to when that technology will come on stream to detect that large number of uninsured drivers?
I'll pass over to Paula, but I would say this is part of our requirement for digital evidence and digital evidence management. Information from the insurance companies around cancellation of policies, plus then the technology of automatic number plate recognition, are the things which make a really big difference here. Paula.
Yeah, certainly, yes. Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, we are totally committed as part of our overall road safety strategy and road policing strategy to ensure that we do detect those who are driving without insurance, both in terms of then we detect through the intercept through stopping vehicles, but also what we want to do is further develop our use of ANPR in this area, as we have been doing with the rollout of ANPR into our vehicles and on access to on the mobility phone. The majority of our roads policing members have that. We've just recently issued another 21 vehicles with a high level of ANPR. Now, that in itself is not sufficient in that it's the access to the lifetime data. So the data we're getting that can be up to 13 days out of date. So the project that you refer to is one that we have been, we're a partner on. I'm on the board for it for the last number of years. The insurance, Irish Motor Insurance Database, IMID, it's been renamed. We are hoping to go live with that Q2 of this year. That will allow us to access lifetime data. We had hoped to do it earlier. It was, rightly so, it had to be reprioritised because of some of the CAD work. So Q2, hopefully, we will be going live, and that will give us access either with an app on the member's mobility phone or an icon on the desktop that we will then be able to see lifetime whether someone has insurance or otherwise. Currently, it's a manual system, and we're having to make telephone calls to find that out, but something we are committed to and working with many other partners who are on that IMID board.
Thank you very much.
And that brings us almost to the end. Just one final item from me. These public meetings with the Commissioner and the authority are just the visible tip of a rich network of engagement that take place between the two organisations on a continuing basis and have done since the beginning. And that complex network of engagements is facilitated by colleagues. This meeting is now over.